Okay, welcome back. So one of the biggest kind of themes, or one of the biggest talking points over the last couple of years has been our recovery from COVID, which has been very interesting in that we had at first a very, very quick domestic recovery, racing back to almost 100% of pre-pandemic numbers by the middle of 2022. And then we have a domestic recovery stagnate a little bit and go a little bit backwards. A lot of that was due to the kind of cost of living crisis with the war in Ukraine, pushing up prices, etc. But while all that was happening, we had this big rebound in international aviation, and we saw it kind of race back to almost near, I think, where it is 100% now. So very slow recovery at first, and then an awful lot quicker. We're now starting to get some kind of real milestone statistics come over from the Christmas break, which just gone. Jake, tell us a little bit more. How well is the industry doing now, kind of 2 years post-COVID?
Well, this is a figure from Air Services. They have their own data from like air charges and things like that that can get a pretty sort of accurate picture of how things are going. According to these figures in the Network Overview Report, which has been, which we've sort of touched on for a few stories, Australian passenger flights on the 22nd of December saw their best single day since before the pandemic. So 22nd of December, there were 1,959 domestic and 686 international flights. So a total of 2,645. This is the highest daily figure since the 26th of September 2019. So on average, December saw 3,546 passenger flights per day, which is 97% of where it was in 2019. In total for December, there was roughly 98% of domestic and 94% of international flights from 2019 levels for December 2019 in December 2023.
So what we're seeing kind of domestically is that the number of people flying might be down a little bit, but in terms of the actual services and the planes in the sky, we're kind of back to normal.
Somewhat, yeah. Domestic. Month to month, so from November 2023 to December, international grew 10.5%. This is number of flights, whereas domestic dropped by 9.8%. This is sort of a Air Services says this is sort of cyclical trend in business travel and general aviation activities. So overall number of flights across the Australian aviation network, 97% of pre-pandemic levels last month.
And we've also had a couple of other milestone moments, if we want to talk through those.
Yeah, this is also coming from Air Services, talking about our Airbus and Boeing fleets. So this is the number of planes that are currently active, specifically from Airbus and Boeing. So not counting things like E-jets and Dash 8s and Saabs and so on. But there are now more Airbus and Boeing jets in our skies than before the pandemic. So there are now 389, as of 31st of December 2023, 389 Airbus and Boeing planes active in Australia's fleets, compared to 370 last year and 382 in 2019. So it's not much more, but it has surpassed that pre-COVID fleet number now. In addition, since last year, Australia has added a net total of 2 more regional planes, 12 more narrow-body jets, and 7 more wide-bodies.
It's really interesting because it feels like, in terms of the industry getting back to normal, we are pretty much there. So if we think that in Australia, the bulk of the restrictions were lifted at the end of 2021, and there was some left at the start of 2022. We've kind of had 2 years pretty much now of this thing being over in terms of its effect on aviation. It looks like we're back to normal. Obviously, not all of the numbers are quite there exactly at 2019 levels, or they would have been expected to be a little bit higher. It's hard to know, though, how easy it's going to be for the industry to completely get back to that, because you've got this cost of living crisis, because because you've got two kind of international wars ongoing. So it's going to be hard to know when is going to be that milestone moment when we actually grow back from that. But nonetheless, it does feel that we really know are pretty much the end of this sort of crisis.
Yeah, in terms of aviation, certainly. I mean, COVID is still out there. Get vaccinated. Get your boosters. This is a good time to remind you because we've got those new variants kicking around. I will say that as well, Melbourne Airport saw last month its busiest month since the start of the pandemic. There were more than 3 million passengers through its terminals in December 2023. This was also the first time since January of 2020 that Melbourne saw more than 1 million international passengers, and it set a new all-time monthly record for number of international flights, 4,976.
So we are nearly there. Almost, we've got now 3 sources of information even this month, and we've had more and more come in, but it does feel that it's kind of over now. In terms of how this is going to affect aviation, things are looking a lot more positive.
Yeah, things are definitely getting back to normal in aviation terms. Well, it'll be interesting to see when those recoveries sort of. I mean, Melbourne's international recovery is I believe sort of there already, but things like the total domestic and total international. It'll be interesting to see when those actually get back above pre-COVID levels.
And interestingly, we're now going to see in 2026 Western Sydney Airport open. That's going to be really important for giving a lot more capacity because, particularly with Sydney, it's kind of full to bursting in terms of its kind of cap on movements. I know Brisbane has kind of room to grow, but definitely that is the thing that Australia needs the most. You've got Rex and Bonza chomping at the bit. But the kind of conclusion is that when I was doing this podcast back in the day, in series 1, in sort of early 2020, the idea that you would have seen the industry recover like this in this short period of time would have been seen to be madness, because back then we thought it was probably likely that Virgin would totally collapse and would go out of business, and we might be lucky to retain Qantas in a smaller form. But in reality, we've come out the other end with Qantas and Qantas now with essentially flying more domestic aircraft than they were before. I think Virgin on the brink of doing what they were doing before, will be very close, and certainly they've got a load of new aircraft on order. You've got Rex now. I think they're on 11 737s flying domestically. And obviously you've got Bonza now with 4, 5, 6 aircrafts in total flying. A new airport in Western Sydney, which is on track now still to open in 2026. This is the kind of a top 1% of outcomes that we could have got. This would have been seen as fairly unbelievable. The other interesting thing is that one of the discussions during COVID is that aviation would never get back to the golden age of 2019, because what would be happening is that the business trips wouldn't be happening. Everyone would be doing everything on Zoom. That's what they said. But that hasn't necessarily proved to be the case. I think when people want to do a big deal, they want to do it in person. They might have a call beforehand, but we haven't.
And you've got to think like trade shows and everything else. Like,
exactly.
CES has been back on in Las Vegas, and you've got all these different trade shows and exhibitions from all over the world. We had South by Southwest Sydney last year, which is not quite a trade show, but it sort of it had that big festival kind of thing going on, and you had the tech show at South by Southwest, where you could go and see Qantas's Project Sunrise cabins and I don't know, a few other things, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting because now we can look at it and go, well, it was obviously stupid to imagine that Zoom was going to change the world and people weren't going to go out much, obviously, but we didn't know that at the time. So it's fascinating to see.
And Tiger, there were some casualties. I mean, Tiger went belly up during the pandemic, for example.
Yeah, exactly. So it has changed the aviation industry, but perhaps not quite as much as you would have thought. Obviously, a lot of people lost their jobs as well, and you can't write that off. But in a sense, it's kind of like it never happened. In a sense, it does feel like the industry's bounced back incredibly strongly.